You deserve nothing. Absolutely nothing. My sister's words hung in the air of Preston and Associates' wood-paneled inheritance reading room, each syllable dripping with 38 years of resentment. Around the gleaming mahogany table, the rest of my family nodded in solemn agreement, their faces masks of righteous indignation. Only Mr. Preston, our family's silver-haired attorney, seemed uncomfortable, his eyes fixed on the papers before him rather than meeting my gaze. My name is Helen Morgan, 35 years old, and until this moment, I'd believed I understood what family meant. I was wrong. The inheritance reading room felt suffocating despite its generous proportions. Oil paintings of the law firm's founding partners stared down at me with judging eyes that matched my relatives' expressions. The leather chair beneath me, usually so comfortable during our family's annual tax planning meetings, now felt like it was swallowing me whole. "Catherine," Mr. Preston cautioned my sister gently, "the terms of your father's will are quite clear." "As I've just read." "I don't care what that paper says," Catherine interrupted, her manicured finger jabbing toward the document on the table. "We all know what Dad really wanted. Ellie abandoned this family years ago. She doesn't get to waltz back in now and claim a share of what we built while she was off finding herself." The way she said those last words made my life's work sound like an extended beach vacation. 10 years providing medical care in conflict zones and underserved communities. 10 years of 16-hour days, traumatic injuries, limited resources, and children I couldn't save. 10 years that had left me with PTSD, a nominal salary, and apparently a family who viewed my choices as a personal betrayal. "I didn't abandon anyone," I said quietly, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I called every week. I came home whenever I could get leave. I invited all of you to visit, to war." My brother Michael scoffed. "While you were playing hero, the rest of us were here, running the company, taking care of Dad after Mom died." "Where were you when he had his first heart attack?" "In some desert tent." "I was in South Sudan," I corrected, the memory searing through me anew. "There was a cholera outbreak. I tried to get a flight home, but there's always an excuse, isn't there?" Catherine cut in. "Always some crisis more important than your own family." I looked at the faces around the table. Catherine, Michael, my uncle Robert, my cousins, James and Diane. People who shared my blood but who had become strangers. Or perhaps they had always been strangers, and I had simply been too young to see it. The Morgan family, respected pillars of Boston society, owners of Morgan Pharmaceuticals, the company my grandfather had founded and my father had expanded into a national success, a family that valued loyalty, tradition, and appearances above all else. And me, the youngest child who had shocked everyone by turning down a guaranteed executive position to join Doctors Without Borders. The disappointment. The idealist, the one who just didn't understand how the real world worked. "If I could continue," Mr. Preston interjected, with the practiced diplomacy of a man who had mediated countless family disputes. "The will is legally binding regardless of personal feelings on the matter. Howard Morgan left his estate to be divided equally among his 3 children, with specific bequests to other family members as I've outlined." "This is wrong," Uncle Robert declared, his jowls quivering with indignation. "Howard and I discussed his intentions extensively. He meant to leave controlling interest in the company to Catherine and Michael. They've been running it for years while Ellie was off playing Florence Nightingale." Mr. Preston adjusted his glasses uncomfortably. "Nevertheless, the will can be contested," Catherine finished for him. She turned to me, her eyes cold, "and it will be on grounds of undue influence." "Undue influence," I repeated, genuinely confused. I was barely in the same country as Dad for most of the past decade. How exactly did I influence him? "Those phone calls," Michael said accusingly, "every Sunday, like clockwork. Filling his head with stories about your humanitarian work. Making him feel guilty about the family business, about wealth, about everything we stand for. The absurdity of it might have made me laugh if the situation weren't so painful. My weekly calls to Dad had been my lifeline, the one consistent connection to home while everything around me was chaos and suffering. We'd talked about my work sometimes, yes, but more often about books we were reading. His garden, memories of Mom. "That's not what happened," I said firmly. "Dad supported my choices. even when the rest of you didn't. Of course he'd say that to your face, Catherine replied with a dismissive wave. He didn't want to hurt your feelings, but he told us how disappointed he was, how he wished you'd grow up and accept your responsibilities. The words stung because I could almost believe them. Dad had been a master of telling people what they wanted to hear, of keeping peace at all costs. Had those warm Sunday conversations been a facade? Had he really been ashamed of me all along? I have here, Catherine continued, pulling a document from her designer handbag. A letter Dad wrote to his attorney, not you, Mr. Preston, but his corporate counsel expressing his true wishes regarding company succession. It states clearly that operational control and majority ownership should remain with the family members actively involved in the business. She slid the paper across to Mr. Preston, who frowned as he examined it. This isn't a legally executed amendment to the will, he said after a moment. It's a preliminary discussion of possible estate planning options dated over 3 years ago. It shows his intent, Uncle Robert insisted, which is what matters when we get to court. Mr. Preston cleared his throat. As your family attorney, I must advise that contesting the will would be costly, time-consuming, and given the clear language of the actual executed document, likely unsuccessful. We don't care, Michael said flatly. We're not giving her a third of this company to run into the ground with her bleeding heart ideas. Dad worked too hard to build this legacy. The word legacy hit me like a physical blow. That had always been the core of our family's identity, the precious Morgan legacy. The company, the wealth, the social standing, not the values behind them, not the potential to do good, just the cold reality of assets and status. I've never expressed any interest in running the company, I said, trying a different approach. I'm a doctor, not a business person. I have no desire to interfere with day-to-day operations. Then, sign over your shares, Catherine demanded. Take a cash payout, a reasonable one, not this ridiculous equal division. Go back to your noble poverty. That's not what Dad wanted, I replied, a strange calm settling over me as I realized I was fighting not just for my inheritance, but for the truth of who our father had been. And you know it, or you wouldn't be so afraid of his actual will. A tense silence fell over the room. Through the tall windows, I could see clouds gathering over Boston's skyline, promising an afternoon storm. How fitting. Perhaps, Mr. Preston suggested carefully, we should take some time to reflect before making any decisions. The reading of the will is an emotional moment for any family, and Howard's passing is still very recent. 2 weeks. It had been 2 weeks since I'd received the call in a remote clinic in Guatemala and raced home, arriving hours after my father had already been pronounced dead. 2 weeks of cold shoulders, accusatory glances, and barely concealed hostility from the family I'd been desperate to return to. There's nothing to reflect on, Catherine said, gathering her things. We'll be contesting the will. All of us. She looked pointedly around the table, where every head nodded in agreement. A united front against the outsider. Against me. In the meantime, she continued with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, we'll be freezing all company assets and accounts pending legal resolution. As current CEO, I have that authority. Catherine, Mr. Preston cautioned, there are proper legal procedures, which we will follow to the letter, she assured him smoothly. Our corporate attorneys will be in touch. She turned to me, that same cold smile in place. I suggest you find somewhere affordable to stay. Ellie, this could take a while, and I know you've never been good with money. With that parting shot, she rose, the others following her lead like obedient soldiers. Uncle Robert paused at the door, looking back at me with what might have been regret flickering briefly across his features before he, too, disappeared into the hallway. Suddenly, only Mr. Preston and I remained in the ornate room, the echo of the closing door hanging between us. I'm sorry, Ellie, he said quietly. This isn't what Howard would have wanted. You knew my father well, I said, studying the older man's face. Did he really tell them he was disappointed in me? That he regretted my choices? Mr. Preston removed his glasses, polishing them slowly with his handkerchief. Your father was immensely proud of you, he said finally. He kept a file in his desk of every article mentioning your work, every email update you sent, when other clients would boast about their children's business successes or political connections. Howard would counter with stories about the lives his daughter was saving around the world. The simple statement broke something inside me. Tears I'd been holding back through the entire hostile meeting finally spilled over. Then why does everyone believe otherwise? I asked, my voice cracking. Why are they so convinced? He thought I'd betrayed the family. Mr. Preston sighed, replacing his glasses. Because that's what they needed to believe to justify their own disappointment in your choices. Howard never corrected them because he knew it would only create more conflict. That sounded exactly like my father avoiding confrontation at all costs, even when the truth was at stake. It had been his greatest flaw as a parent, allowing false narratives to take root rather than risking an uncomfortable conversation. What do I do now? I asked, suddenly feeling exhausted beyond measure. The jet lag from my rushed return, the grief I hadn't properly processed, and now this family betrayal was all crashing down at once. Legally speaking, the will is clear and should prevail, Mr. Preston said. But Catherine is correct that these battles can be lengthy and expensive. As your father's attorney, I am obligated to execute his stated wishes impartially. He hesitated, then added more softly, but as someone who respected Howard greatly, I would suggest you look through his personal effects before they're divided or disposed of. He was a meticulous man who rarely left important matters to chance. There was something in his tone, a subtle emphasis that made me look at him more closely. Is there something specific I should be looking for? I couldn't say, he replied carefully. Attorney-client privilege extends beyond death. I can only execute the documents formally presented to me as his legal representative. Before I could press further, his assistant knocked on the door, reminding him of his next appointment. As I gathered my belongings, Mr. Preston handed me his card with a personal number written on the back. Call me if you need anything, he said, and don't let them convince you that your path has been anything less than honorable. Your father never did. Outside, the threatened storm had arrived. Rain falling in heavy sheets that matched my mood. I stood under the law firm's awning, suddenly realizing I had nowhere to go. The family home where I'd been staying since my return from Guatemala would no longer welcome me. My apartment in New York had been sublet while I was overseas. And Catherine's warning about frozen assets wasn't idle. My attempt to withdraw cash from an ATM was met with an account unavailable message. I was alone in my hometown, grief-stricken, betrayed by my family, and effectively penniless. The irony wasn't lost on me. After a decade treating the world's most vulnerable populations, I had become vulnerable myself. As I tried to decide my next move, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Dr. Morgan, this is Anna Lopez, your father's housekeeper. I have something important to give you from Mr. Howard. Can you meet me at the house? Tomorrow at 10 when the family is at the company board meeting. I stared at the message, a small flicker of hope igniting in my chest. Whatever Anna had for me, it was significant enough that she was risking her job to deliver it secretly. I'll be there, I texted back, then stepped out into the rain, determined to find temporary shelter and gather my strength for whatever came next. The family that should have been my safe harbor had become hostile waters, but perhaps my father had left me a compass after all. The family estate looked different in the Morning Lightmore Museum than home. Its federal-style architecture impressive but cold. As a child, I'd loved the sprawling gardens and hidden nooks, but the house itself had always felt like a place where I needed to be on my best behavior rather than truly relax. I parked my rental car secured with the emergency credit card. I kept 4 evacuations in conflict zones a block away and approached on foot, not wanting to alert any family members who might have skipped the board meeting. The side gate creaked in that familiar way that instantly transported me back to teenage years, sneaking in after staying too late at the library. Anna was waiting at the kitchen door, her kind face tight with worry. She'd been with our family since I was in high school, quietly managing the household while my mother was ill and afterward, becoming the steady presence that kept everything running smoothly. Dr. Ellie, she said, pulling me into a quick hug, come inside quickly. We don't have much time. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and coffee, Anna's constant offerings regardless of the season or situation. She poured me a cup without asking and pushed a plate of pastries toward me. You're too thin, she observed critically. These places you go don't feed you properly. The familiar mothering almost broke me. After days of hostility, this simple kindness felt overwhelming. Anna, what's going on? I asked, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. Your message said you have something from Dad. She glanced nervously at the clock. 2 weeks before he died, your father called me into his study. He was very serious, not himself. He gave me this. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small key. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would give it only to you when you were alone. A key. I turned the small brass object over in my palm. To what? To the hidden safe in his study. Not the main one. Knows about that one. There's another behind the painting of your mother. This was news to me. I didn't know about any hidden safe. Nobody does, except your father and me. I helped him install it 3 years ago. She leaned closer, lowering her voice though we were alone. After his trip to visit you in that refugee camp, he came back different. Said he needed to prepare for eventualities. The timeline aligned with my father's visit to the Syrian border where I'd been working. It had been his only trip to see me in the field a week that had changed our relationship profoundly. He'd witnessed firsthand the work I did, the conditions, the desperate need. He'd also seen how the small mobile clinic I ran constantly struggled for basic supplies that his company produced and sold at massive profits. We'd had long conversations during that visit about purpose, legacy, and responsibility. I'd assumed they were just philosophical discussions, the kind parents and adult children have when separated by vastly different worlds. Had they been something more? I need to see what's in that safe, I said, standing up. Anna nodded. Anna, the family should be gone another hour at least. I'll keep watch. My father's study was exactly as he'd left it, books meticulously arranged, desk organized with military precision, the leather chair still shaped to his form. The painting of my mother hung behind his desk, her gentle smile overlooking the room where he'd spent most of his time after her death. Carefully, I lifted the heavy frame away from the wall, revealing a small wall safe with a keyhole rather than a combination dial. The key Anna had given me fit perfectly, turning with a satisfying click. Inside was a single document envelope and a smaller personal letter with my name written in my father's distinctive handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the letter first. My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and events have unfolded as I feared they might. I owe you an apology for my cowardice in life, for not standing more firmly against the tide of family opinion, for allowing your siblings to believe you had somehow betrayed our legacy, rather than enhanced it. The truth is, your courage in charting your own path has been my greatest pride and deepest shame. Pride in the woman you've become. Shame in my own failure to follow your example. While you have saved lives directly with your hands and heart, I have hidden behind corporate structures and profit margins, telling myself that making medicine available at prices many cannot afford was enough. Your work at the border 3 years ago opened my eyes to realities I had conveniently ignored. The supplies you begged for, supplies my own company produced, were sitting in warehouses because the profit margins in those regions were deemed insufficient. Children died while we discussed market penetration strategies. I returned home determined to change things, only to meet resistance at every turn from the board, from Catherine and Michael, from the very infrastructure I had helped build. The Morgan Pharmaceuticals that my father created to help people had become a machine designed only to enrich shareholders. So I began making other arrangements. The document enclosed is my true final will and testament, executed 6 months ago with a different law firm. Mr. Preston is not aware of its existence. As I feared information might leak back to your siblings, this will supersede the one they are currently preparing to contest. The primary differences are: 1. While you, Catherine, and Michael still receive equal shares of my personal assets, the corporate structure has been significantly altered. 2. I have created the Helen Morgan Foundation, named for your mother, who always saw the best in everyone. This foundation will receive 51% controlling interest in Morgan Pharmaceuticals, with a mandate to ensure medications reach those who need them most, regardless of profit potential. 3. You have been named executive director of this foundation, with a board comprised of medical and humanitarian experts rather than business interests. Catherine and Michael will be furious. Of course, They will feel betrayed, much as they have accused you of betraying the family. Perhaps someday they will understand that true betrayal would have been continuing on our current path, placing wealth above human life. The legal firm of Winters and Associates holds the original will. Jennifer Winters is expecting your call. The process for executing this document in place of the one Mr. Preston has is detailed in the enclosed papers. I wish I had found the courage to make these changes openly during my lifetime, to weather the storm of family disapproval as you have done so bravely for years. Instead, I leave you with this final burden: the task of transforming our family legacy into something truly worthy of pride. Know that I have always loved you, respected you, and been humbled by your example. Whatever they may tell you, never doubt that truth. With love and faith in your strength. Dad, I read the letter twice, tears blurring my vision before turning to the legal document. It was indeed a complete will, notarized and witnessed, with detailed provisions exactly as my father had described. The Helen Morgan Foundation would fundamentally transform Morgan Pharmaceuticals from a profit-driven enterprise to one balanced between sustainable business and humanitarian mission. It was revolutionary. It was exactly what I'd always believed our family's company could and should be, and it would make me the most hated person in my family. The sound of a car in the driveway jolted me back to the present danger. Through the study window, I saw Catherine's Mercedes pulling up far earlier than expected. Quickly, I photographed every page of the documents with my phone, then returned the originals to the safe, locked it, and rehung the painting. I had just settled into a chair, pretending to look at family photos, when Catherine appeared in the doorway. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Saying goodbye," I replied, holding up a framed photos of our parents. "I thought I might take a few personal mementos before I go. Family photos, Mom's recipes, nothing valuable." Catherine's expression softened marginally. "Fine. But check with me before you take anything. Some of those photos are originals." It was a small concession, but it revealed something important. Despite everything, Catherine still saw me as her little sister, someone she could still control rather than a genuine threat. That perception might give me the time I needed. "I'm sorry about yesterday," I said, testing the waters, the reading, the way everything exploded. Dad would have hated seeing us fight like that. Dad would have hated seeing his company handed over to someone who doesn't understand the first thing about running it, she countered, but her tone lacked the previous day's venom. "This isn't personal, Ellie. It's about protecting what our family has built." "I understand that," I said carefully. "More than you might think." She gave me a long, assessing look. "Be out within the hour. I have the security codes changing at noon." With that, she turned and left, her heels clicking authoritatively down the hallway. Anna appeared moments later, her expression anxious. "Did she suspect anything?" "I don't think so," I assured her, "but I need to leave quickly." "Thank you, Anna, for everything." She pressed a small package into my hands. "Banana bread for later." "And Ellie," she hesitated, "your father was different after seeing your work. Prouder, more purposeful. Whatever is in those documents, it comes from the best part of him." I hugged her tightly, then slipped out the side door and made my way back to my rental car. Once safely away from the estate, I pulled into a coffee shop parking lot and called the number 4 Winters and Associates that had been included in my father's instructions. "Jennifer Winters speaking, Ms. Winters. This is Ellie Morgan. I believe my father, Howard Morgan, left something in your keeping." There was a moment of silence before she responded, her voice now carefully professional. "Dr. Morgan?" "Yes, we've been expecting your call. How soon can you come to our offices?" "I can be there in 30 minutes. "Perfect. And Dr. Morgan, it might be best if you weren't followed. Your father was quite specific about confidentiality in this matter." The warning sent a chill through me. How much had my father anticipated the family's reaction? How deep did this conflict truly go? I took a circuitous route to the address Jennifer Winters had provided, located not in Boston's financial district like Preston and Associates, but in a converted mill building in Cambridge. The office was modern and bright, lacking the oppressive wood paneling and oil portraits of traditional law firms. Jennifer Winters herself proved equally different from my expectations. Woman in her early 40s, with a streak of purple in her dark hair and tattoos, visible beneath her professional blazer. Your father found us through your work, actually, she explained as she led me to her office. We specialize in nonprofit law, particularly organizations working at the intersection of corporate resources and humanitarian needs. He said his daughter had shown him that such intersections were not only possible, but essential. Her words warmed me, further confirmation that my father's transformation had been genuine rather than a deathbed conversion. He left a fairly comprehensive set of instructions, she continued, retrieving a sealed envelope from her safe, including contingency plans in case of resistance from other family members. They're already planning to contest the will they know about, I told her. Once they learn about this one, they'll escalate dramatically, she finished for me. Which is why your father created this roadmap. He anticipated every possible legal challenge. For the next 2 hours, Jennifer walked me through the detailed strategy my father had developed with her firm's help. The new will was legally sound, executed properly with credible witnesses. The foundation had been established as a legal entity 6 months earlier, with initial funding and a formal charter. Most importantly, my father had documented his rationale for the changes extensively, creating a record that would be difficult to challenge as undue influence or diminished capacity. He was, Jennifer noted with admiration, extraordinarily methodical. That was the father I knew, the brilliant businessman who left nothing to chance, who planned 10 steps ahead. He had applied those same skills to his final act of transformation. What happens next? I asked, overwhelmed by the scope of what lay before me. That depends on you, Jennifer said directly. Your father created the mechanism, but you must decide how to implement it. There are several options. She outlined the possibilities. We could file the new will immediately, triggering an all-out legal battle with my siblings. We could approach them privately first, seeking some kind of negotiated acceptance. Or we could wait until their challenge to the first will was underway, then reveal the second as a countermaneuver. Each approach has advantages and risks, Jennifer explained. Your father didn't specify which to take. He said, Ellie will know the right path when the time comes. His faith in me was both comforting and terrifying. How could I possibly know the right way through this minefield? As I left Jennifer's office with copies of all the relevant documents, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Family meeting tomorrow, 2 p.m., Preston's office. Be there if you want any hope of a reasonable settlement. The message's timing seemed almost prophetic, as if my father were indeed guiding events from beyond. This meeting would gather everyone in one place, the perfect opportunity to reveal the truth, but also the moment when family relationships might be damaged beyond repair. That night, in my hotel room, I spread all the documents across the bed and tried to see the bigger picture. The Helen Morgan Foundation wasn't just a restructuring of corporate ownership. It was a complete reimagining of what Morgan Pharmaceuticals could be still profitable, but with priorities that balanced shareholder returns with humanitarian impact. My father had created detailed plans for targeted medication distribution programs, research initiatives focused on neglected diseases, and pricing structures that would make essential drugs affordable in underserved markets. It was brilliant, sustainable, and exactly what I would have designed myself if given the chance. But it would require buy-in from the existing corporate structure to implement smoothly. The very executives and board members who would see it as a betrayal of business principles, including my brother and sister who had devoted their careers to the company as it currently existed. As dawn broke over Boston, I made my decision. Not the easiest path, nor the most confrontational, but the one that honored both my father's vision and the complexity of family bonds. I would attend tomorrow's meeting ready for either reconciliation or war, depending on what I found there. With newfound purpose, I opened my laptop and began preparing for the most important presentation of my life. Preston & Associates' largest conference room had replaced the inheritance reading room for this family meeting. The space was designed to intimidate soaring ceilings, walls lined with law books, and a table that could comfortably seat 20, but now held only 7 people. My siblings, Uncle Robert, my cousins, Mr. Preston, and me. I'd arrived early, partly from strategy and partly from the military punctuality my father had instilled in all of us. It gave me time to set up my materials discreetly and observe as the others filtered in, their expressions ranging from Catherine's cold confidence to Michael's barely contained hostility to Mr. Preston's professional neutrality. "Thank you all for coming," Catherine began, once everyone was seated. "We've asked Mr. Preston to mediate this discussion, though we've also engaged specialized estate litigation counsel who will join us if necessary." The threat was thinly veiled. "Before we begin," I said, "I'd like to understand exactly what this meeting is meant to accomplish." Catherine exchanged glances with Michael before responding. "We're offering you an opportunity to resolve this situation amicably. The family has discussed it and is prepared to offer you a fair cash settlement in exchange for relinquishing any claim to operational control or voting shares in Morgan Pharmaceuticals. And if I decline, then we proceed with contesting the will," Michael said flatly, "which will freeze all assets for months, possibly years, while draining the estate with legal fees. Nobody wins in that scenario. Ellie, except the lawyers," Uncle Robert added with a humorless chuckle. I looked around the table at these people who shared my blood, trying to see them as my father might have, not as enemies, but as products of the same legacy and expectations that had shaped him until his transformation. "Before I respond to your offer," I said carefully, "I'd like to share something with all of you. A perspective you might not have considered." Catherine's sigh was audible. "If this is another speech about the moral imperative of humanitarian work—" "It's not a speech," I interrupted, surprising her. I rarely challenged my older sister directly. "It's information that might help us find common ground." I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's display system. The screen behind me came to life with a simple title: "The Future of Morgan Pharmaceuticals, Balancing Profit and Purpose." "What is this?" Mikhail demanded. "It's a presentation I've been working on," I explained, "about how our company could evolve to meet both business objectives and humanitarian needs. I'd like 15 minutes of your time to walk through it. After that, if you still want to proceed with litigation, we can discuss those terms." They exchanged skeptical glances, but curiosity won out. Catherine gestured for me to continue. For the next quarter hour, I presented a carefully curated version of my father's vision: the market opportunities in underserved regions, the brand value of corporate social responsibility, the long-term sustainability of a business model that balanced profit with purpose. I showed case studies of pharmaceutical companies that had successfully implemented similar approaches, complete with financial projections and shareholder returns. What I didn't mention was the Helen Morgan Foundation, or the second will. This presentation was meant to test the waters, to see if any part of my family might be receptive to the underlying principles before I revealed the legal bombshell. As I concluded, the room remained silent. Michael studied the financial projections with a furrowed brow. Catherine's expression was unreadable. Uncle Robert and my cousins looked confused, as if they'd come expecting a simple negotiation and found themselves in a business strategy session instead. Mr. Preston broke the silence. "That was quite comprehensive, Ellie. I wasn't aware you had such detailed knowledge of pharmaceutical business models. I've spent a decade working where these products are desperately needed but unavailable," I replied. Understanding why became essential to my work. "It's an interesting academic exercise," Catherine said dismissively, "but it fundamentally misunderstands the realities of our industry. The charitable components you're proposing would slash profitability by at least 30%. Actually," Michael said slowly, surprising everyone, "the financial models she's showing project only a 12 to 15% reduction in short-term profits, with potential long-term growth in emerging markets offsetting those losses within 5 years. He looked at me with newfound respect. "Did Dad help you with this?" "The opening I'd been waiting for, in a way," I acknowledged. "Dad and I discussed these concepts extensively, especially after he visited me in the field 3 years ago. He saw firsthand the disconnect between our company's capabilities and the needs of patients in crisis regions." "Dad was a businessman first and foremost," Catherine insisted. "He understood that without profitability, nothing else is possible." "He was a businessman," I agreed, "but he was also a father who instilled values in all of us. Remember what he used to say? The Morgan name stands for integrity above all." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across Catherine's confident facade. "What exactly are you proposing here?" Ellie?" Uncle Robert asked. "That we voluntarily restructure the company based on your humanitarian ideals. That's not what Howard intended for his legacy." The moment of truth had arrived. I took a deep breath. "Actually," I said quietly, "it's exactly what he intended." I reached into my briefcase and withdrew the folder Jennifer Winters had prepared, containing certified copies of the second will and foundation documents. 6 months before his death, Dad executed a new will, one that reflects his evolved understanding of what our family legacy should truly represent. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. Catherine's eyes narrowed to slits. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "Mr. Preston has the will right there." She pointed to the folder on the table. Mr. Preston looked genuinely surprised. "This is the first I'm hearing of another will, Ellie. As your father's primary attorney, Dad used a different firm for this," I explained, sliding the documents across the table to him. "Winters and Associates, specializing in non-profit law. Everything is properly executed and notarized." As Mr. Preston examined the papers with a lawyer's careful scrutiny, I continued, "The will you have, Mr. Preston, is from 2 years ago. This one supersedes it. The primary difference involves the creation of the Helen Morgan Foundation, which receives controlling interest in Morgan Pharmaceuticals with a mandate to implement exactly the kind of balanced approach I just outlined." The explosion I'd expected came instantly. "This is fraud," Catherine shouted, half rising from her chair. "A forgery. Dad would never do this behind our backs." "I don't think it's a forgery," Mr. Preston said soberly, still reviewing the documents. "The signatures appear genuine, the witnesses are credible, and the notarization is valid. If this is authentic and a court would likely find that it does legally supersede the will in my possession." "This is what you've been planning all along," Michael accused, his face flushed with anger. "Using Dad's sentimentality about Mom to manipulate him into this corporate hijacking?" "I didn't know about any of this until after Dad died," I said truthfully. "He kept it from everyone, including me." "Convenient?" Catherine spat. "And I suppose he just happened to name you executive director of this foundation that will control our company." "Read the documents," I urged. "Dad's reasoning is detailed extensively. This isn't about me versus you. It's about aligning our family business with the values he rediscovered later in life." Uncle Robert, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "May I see those?" he asked Mr. Preston, who passed him the folder. As the eldest Morgan of his generation and my father's brother, Robert had always carried a certain gravitas in family matters. The room fell into tense silence as he read, his expression giving nothing away. Catherine paced near the windows while Michael stared fixedly at the financial projections still displayed on the screen. "These appear legitimate," Uncle Robert finally said, looking up. "The question is whether Howard was in his right mind when he executed them." "That's our angle," Catherine said immediately. "Diminished capacity. He was already showing signs of heart trouble then. Medication could have affected his judgment." The calculated coldness of her strategy shocked me. She would rather paint our father as mentally incompetent than accept that he had genuinely wanted to change the company's direction. "His doctor's reports are included in the supporting documentation," I pointed out, "along with psychiatric evaluation confirming his mental competence at the time of signing." "Dad anticipated your response, Catherine. He prepared for it." "Of course he did," Michael muttered. "Strategic planning was his specialty." Mr. Preston cleared his throat. "While I was unaware of this second will, I can attest that Howard showed no signs of cognitive impairment in our regular meetings right up until his passing. A diminished capacity challenge would be difficult to sustain." Catherine whirled on him. "Whose side are you on?" "As I mentioned during the initial reading, my obligation is to execute Howard's legal wishes impartially," Mr. Preston replied calmly. "Based on these documents, it appears his final wishes differ from what we initially understood." "This will destroy the company," Catherine insisted, turning her attention back to me. "Everything Dad built, everything our grandfather created gone because you filled his head with guilt during his final years." "That's not true," I said, standing to face her directly. "The Foundation's charter explicitly requires maintaining the company's financial viability. It simply balances profit with purpose. Read it yourself." "I don't need to read it," she snapped. I've dedicated my life to this company, 20 years building it into what it is today, while you were off playing savior to strangers. You have no right. It's not about rights, I interrupted, my patience finally fraying. It's about responsibilities, the responsibilities that come with creating medications that can save lives. Dad recognized that power comes with moral obligations, not just profit opportunities. Easy for you to say, Michael cut in. You've never had to make payroll for 5,000 employees or answer to shareholders. No, I acknowledged. I've just had to tell mothers their children died from diseases we have treatments for, but can't distribute affordably. I've had 2 ration medications that your warehouses have in abundance. I've had to witness suffering that our family business has the power to alleviate but chooses not to for the sake of profit margins. My voice broke on the last words, the accumulated grief of countless such moments washing over me. This isn't about me taking something from you. It's about all of us giving something back. The raw emotion silenced even Catherine momentarily. In that brief window, Uncle Robert spoke again. I'd like to propose a recess, he said formally. The family should discuss this privately before determining next steps. Mr. Preston nodded. A reasonable suggestion. Shall we reconvene in 1 hour? As the others filed out, Uncle Robert gestured for me to remain behind. Once we were alone, his official demeanor dropped, revealing the uncle who had taught me to fish and slipped me extra desserts when my parents weren't looking. Your father called me, you know, he said quietly, 3 months ago. Said he wanted to discuss necessary changes to the company. I assumed he meant succession planning, passing more control to Catherine and Michael. He shook his head ruefully. I should have listened more carefully. He tried to do this the right way, I said, to bring the family along gradually, but he ran out of time. Uncle Robert nodded, absently straightening his tie, a nervous habit he shared with my father. Howard was always the visionary between us. I handled operations, he charted the course. If he believed this new direction was necessary, he trailed off, then fixed me with a penetrating look. But you need to understand what you're asking of your siblings. This company has been their entire lives. I do understand, I insisted. That's why I presented the business case first. This isn't about dismantling what they've built. It's about evolving it into something even more valuable, a company that leads the industry in both profitability and purpose. He studied me for a long moment. You sound like your father when he was young, before the pressures of running a public company wore down his idealism. With a heavy sigh, he added, I'll talk to them. No promises, but I'll try to help them see beyond their initial reaction. As he left, I collapsed back into my chair, emotionally drained. The confrontation had gone both better and worse than I'd anticipated. The legal documents had made the impact I'd hoped for, but the personal breach with my siblings seemed even wider than before. I was gathering my materials when Mr. Preston returned, closing the door behind him. That was quite a revelation, he said, taking a seat across from me. Though perhaps not entirely surprising. What do you mean? Your father consulted me about charitable restructuring options last year, he explained. Hypothetically, he said, I provided some preliminary advice, but assumed he'd abandon the idea when he didn't pursue it further. He adjusted his glasses thoughtfully. Now I understand he simply sought different counsel for the implementation. Are you offended? I asked, genuinely concerned. Mr. Preston had been our family attorney for decades. Not at all. Winters & Associates specializes in exactly the type of structure he created. It was a sound decision. He leaned forward slightly. But you should prepare yourself, Ellie. Your siblings won't accept this easily, regardless of what your uncle says to them. I know, I sighed. But I have to try. For Dad. For what he believed our family could stand for. Your father was fortunate to have at least one child who truly understood his values, Mr. Preston said with unexpected warmth. Then, reverting to his professional demeanor, he added, I'll need to formally recuse myself from mediating further discussions given the conflict between the two wills. But personally, I wish you success. The hour passed slowly as I waited in the conference room, alternating between reviewing my notes and staring out at the Boston skyline. When the door finally opened, I was surprised to see only Michael enter, without Catherine or the others. They're still talking, he explained, taking a seat across from me. Or rather, Catherine is still shouting and Uncle Robert is trying to calm her down. He looked tired. The anger from earlier replaced by something more complex. I wanted to ask you something, privately. Of course, I said cautiously. Did Dad really keep detailed records of my work? The articles and updates? The question caught me off guard. Yes. He had a whole file in his desk. Photos, too, from field hospitals and clinics. He showed them to colleagues. Michael nodded slowly, absorbing this. He never said anything to me about being proud of you. I mean, he criticized your choices to us, said you were wasting your potential. He met my eyes directly. Was that all an act? To keep the peace. The pain in his question was palpable, the possibility that our father had presented different faces to different children, leaving each of us with incomplete truths. I think, I said carefully, that Dad told each of us what he thought we needed to hear. He validated my choices to me because I was already insecure about disappointing the family. And perhaps he emphasized the business perspective with you and Catherine because that's what connected you. That's a diplomatic way of saying he manipulated all of us, Michael observed with a hint of bitterness. Not maliciously, I clarified. Dad avoided conflict at all costs. It was his way of trying to maintain relationships with three very different children. Michael fell silent, staring at his hands. Finally, he said, the financial models in your presentation, they're actually quite sound. The concessions surprised me. They're based on case studies from other pharmaceutical companies that have implemented similar approaches. The data is real. I know. I recognized some of the examples. He hesitated. I've been researching similar models myself, actually, quietly. The industry is changing. Whether Catherine wants to admit it or not, corporate social responsibility isn't just a buzzword anymore. This revelation shifted something fundamental in how I saw my brother. All these years, I'd assumed he shared Catherine's ruthless business focus completely. The possibility that he might have been nurturing his own doubts about the company's direction opened new avenues for connection. Michael, I said earnestly, I'm not trying to take over the company or undermine your work. The foundation needs experienced pharmaceutical executives to succeed. Dad's plan includes substantial roles for both you and Catherine, if you want them. Catherine won't see it that way, he warned. For her, it's all or nothing. Control is non-negotiable. And for you? I asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately, weighing his words carefully. I need to think. To read the full foundation charter and understand exactly what Dad envisioned. But double quotes, he met my eyes directly. I'm not automatically opposed to evolution, Ellie. Even significant evolution. It was the smallest of openings, but more than I dared hope for. Before I could respond, the door opened again, and the rest of the family returned. From Catherine's thunderous expression, I could tell Uncle Robert's intervention had not produced a miraculous change of heart. We've discussed the situation, she announced without preamble, and we've decided to challenge this supposed new will immediately. Our attorneys will file first thing tomorrow morning. Uncle Robert's apologetic glance told me he'd tried his best without success. Catherine, I said, making one final attempt at reconciliation. Please read the full foundation charter before you make this decision. Dad's vision includes important roles for all of us, working together. I don't need to read anything, she replied coldly. This company has been my life's work. I won't let it be hijacked by your guilt-driven social agenda. It's Dad's agenda, I corrected gently. His final wish for the company he built. A wish he conveniently kept secret until he wasn't here to defend it, she countered. How stupid do you think we are, Ellie? This has your fingerprints all over it. The accusation stung. Not least because it was so fundamentally wrong. I had influenced my father's thinking, certainly, but the careful legal strategy, the detailed business planning, those were pure Howard Morgan, applying his legendary business acumen to a new purpose. Think about what you're doing, I pleaded. A protracted legal battle will damage the company, drain resources, and ultimately end with the same result. The second will is legally sound. We'll see about that, Catherine said with dangerous calm. You're not the only one with resources, little sister. With that parting shot, she stalked out of the room, followed by my cousins. Uncle Robert paused briefly at the door. Give her time, he advised quietly. She's built her entire identity around running this company. This feels like erasure to her. As the door closed behind them, Michael and I were left alone in the suddenly quiet conference room. The confrontation had gone almost exactly as I'd feared: complete rejection from Catherine, uncertainty from the others, and the promise of an ugly, legal battle ahead. "So that's it then," I said, the weight of what lay ahead settling heavily on my shoulders. "We go to war." Michael studied me thoughtfully. "Not necessarily all of us," he said cryptically, then gathered his things and followed the others out. Left alone, I began packing up my presentation materials, wondering if I'd just destroyed whatever remained of my family bonds. Had I done the right thing? Would my father's vision be worth the cost of this division? As I placed my laptop in my bag, I noticed a folded piece of paper that hadn't been there before. Opening it, I found a note in Michael's handwriting. "Meet me tomorrow, 9 a.m., Dad's fishing cabin. Come alone. We need to talk." The note kindled a small spark of hope. The fishing cabin on Lake Winnipesaukee had been our father's retreat, the one place where business was never discussed and family tensions seemed to melt away. It was neutral territory, filled with happier memories. Perhaps, I thought as I left the now empty conference room, there was still a path forward that honored both my father's transformed vision and the family he had loved so imperfectly but completely. Dawn mist still clung to Lake Winnipesaukee as I navigated the familiar dirt road leading to my father's cabin. The modest structure came into view: weathered cedar shingles, wide porch with mismatched rocking chairs, the dock extending into the water where a small fishing boat still rested. Unlike the formal family estate or the imposing corporate headquarters, this place had always felt authentically like home. Michael's car was already there, parked beneath the old oak tree. As I pulled alongside it, the cabin door opened and my brother emerged, 2 steaming mugs in hand. He looked different, here his usual crisp business attire replaced by jeans and a faded flannel shirt that had probably belonged to our father. "You came," he said, offering me one of the mugs. "Wasn't sure you would." Of course, I came. I accepted the coffee gratefully, the morning chill seeping through my light jacket. "This place, it matters to all of us." He nodded, gesturing toward the porch chairs. We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the mist gradually lift from the lake's surface, revealing the mountains beyond. "I spent all night reading," Michael finally said. "The Foundation charter, Dad's personal notes, everything included with the will. It's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" I asked carefully. "Some half-baked humanitarian manifesto, a retirement project Dad got emotional about after seeing suffering up close." He took a long sip of coffee. "It's not that at all. It's possibly the most comprehensive business transformation strategy I've ever seen, with detailed implementation phases, market analysis, contingency planning. Dad approached this with the same rigor he brought to every major corporate initiative." "That's who he was," I agreed. "Methodical, strategic, leaving nothing to chance." "Except telling his children directly what he was planning," Michael pointed out with a hint of the old bitterness. "I think he was working up to it," I said. "Anna, his housekeeper, told me he'd been different these past few years, more purposeful. I believe he was building toward a family conversation, but his heart gave out before he got there." Michael nodded slowly. "That fits with some things I noticed. Questions he was asking about corporate social responsibility metrics, interest in our disaster relief donation programs that he'd never shown before." He looked out at the lake. I didn't connect the dots. Then, a loon called from somewhere across the water, its mournful cry echoing in the morning stillness. "I've made a decision," Michael said abruptly. "I'm not joining Catherine's legal challenge." The statement hung in the air between us, its significance enormous. "What changed your mind?" I asked, hardly daring to believe this shift. "3 things." He set down his mug, ticking points off on his fingers. "First, the legal strategy is sound, as much as Catherine refuses to see it. Dad documented everything meticulously. Fighting, it will cost millions with little chance of success. And second, the business case actually makes sense. The markets are evolving exactly as your presentation showed. Pharmaceutical companies with strong social impact components are outperforming traditional models in long-term sustainability metrics. Dad saw that trend before most of us. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts before continuing. But most importantly, I found something in Dad's desk at the office yesterday evening, a letter addressed to me that he never sent. It was, Michael's voice wavered slightly, something I'd rarely heard from my always composed brother. It was about you, actually, about how watching you fight for your principles despite family pressure had made him question his own choices. How he hoped I might find the same courage someday. The revelation stunned me. He never told me that. He never told any of us what he really thought, Michael said with a sad smile. Classic Howard Morgan, keeping his deepest feelings locked away, managing everyone's expectations separately, a divide-and-conquer strategy that ultimately divided us, I observed. Until now, maybe. Michael reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document. I've drafted this. It's not legally binding yet, but it could be a starting point. I accepted the papers with curiosity that turned to amazement as I read. It was a proposed compromise. Michael would support the Helen Morgan Foundation's controlling interest in the company, in exchange for a clearly defined executive role for himself and protection for the jobs of current employees. Most surprisingly, it included a path for Catherine to remain a CEO with significant operational autonomy, provided she worked within the Foundation's broader humanitarian mission. Do you think she'd consider it? I asked, hope and skepticism warring within me. Not immediately, Michael admitted. Catherine doesn't compromise easily. But when she realizes the legal battle is unwinnable and that this preserves her position while actually expanding her influence in new markets, double quotes, he shrugged. She's a businesswoman first. Eventually, the logic will penetrate. And you. I studied my brother's face. Can you really see yourself working within this new structure? It's a significant change from how you've operated all these years. Michael was silent for a moment, looking out at the lake where our father had taught us both to fish, to wait patiently, to respect the natural world. I've been feeling restless for a while, he finally admitted. The endless cycle of quarterly profits, shareholder demands, market expansion, it's begun to feel hollow. I look at my kids and wonder what legacy I'm really creating for them. He turned to me with unexpected vulnerability. You found purpose in your work, Ellie? I envy that. The admission cracked something open between us years of distance and misunderstanding, giving way to a glimpse of genuine connection. It's not too late, I said gently. Dad found his way to a new purpose in his 60s. The Foundation creates space for all of us to contribute our different strengths towards something meaningful. That's what I'm beginning to see, Michael acknowledged. It's not about you versus us, or profit versus purpose. It's about finding the integration point, the way forward that honors both business realities and human needs. As the morning sun finally broke through completely, burning away the last wisps of mist from the lake, we continued talking for the first time in years, about our father's complex legacy, about the Foundation's potential, about our own journeys away from and back toward each other. Around noon, Michael's phone buzzed with a text. It's Catherine, he said, reading the message. She wants to meet the whole family, plus attorneys, tomorrow at the company headquarters. That doesn't sound promising, I observed. No, he agreed. But it's an opportunity. Will you trust me to handle it my way? To try something before we resort to all-out legal warfare. The question represented a crossroads: continue down the path of confrontation my father had prepared for, or take a risk on Michael's alternative approach. The old Ellie, desperate for family approval, might have immediately deferred to her big brother. The new Ellie, strengthened by years of making life-and-death decisions in crisis zones, weighed the options carefully. What exactly do you have in mind? I asked. Michael outlined his strategy, a bold countermove that might just work. If I was willing to temporarily step back and let him take the lead, it was risky, but it offered a path toward reconciliation that my father's secretive approach had never provided. All right, I said finally. We'll try it your way. But if it fails, then we execute Dad's legal strategy. He finished for me. The foundation takes control, and the family fractures permanently. His expression grew solemn. I'm trying to prevent that outcome, Ellie. For all of us. As we drove separately back toward Boston, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in just a few days. The sister who had arrived for her father's funeral feeling like an outsider in her own family was now potentially on the cusp of a new beginning, not just for herself, but for the Morgan legacy as a whole. Whether Catherine would allow that transformation remained to be seen. The next day, Morgan Pharmaceuticals' executive conference room felt like a battleground. Catherine had assembled an impressive show of three attorneys from a prestigious firm known for aggressive litigation, the company's executive leadership team, and even a few board members. Uncle Robert and my cousins sat nearby, looking uncomfortable but present. When Michael and I entered together, Catherine's eyes narrowed suspiciously. We had deliberately arrived at the same time, presenting a united front that clearly hadn't been part of her expected scenario. I'm glad everyone could join us, she began with artificial pleasantness. As you know, we're facing an unprecedented situation regarding my father's legacy. Our attorneys have prepared a detailed brief outlining the grounds for challenging the validity of this supposed second will. One of the lawyers, a hawk-faced woman with impeccable credentials displayed prominently on her business card, distributed thick document folders to everyone present. Before we proceed, Michael interrupted smoothly. I'd like to make a brief presentation of my own, something I believe will be relevant to these discussions. Catherine frowned. That's not on the agenda, Michael. Indulge me, he replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. 10 minutes, then your attorneys can continue. Reluctantly, Catherine nodded. Michael stood and moved to the front of the room, connecting his laptop to the display system with practiced ease. As CEO of Morgan Pharmaceuticals for the past 8 years, he began, I've been responsible for operational efficiency, market strategy, and long-term business planning. In that capacity, I've been quietly researching industry trends that will shape our future competitiveness. The screen behind him displayed a series of graphs showing market projections, consumer trend data, and regulatory forecasts. The pharmaceutical landscape is changing fundamentally, Michael continued, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used for board presentations. Consumer demand for corporate social responsibility, regulatory pressure for equitable pricing, and emerging market opportunities in previously underserved regions are converging to create both challenges and opportunities. I watched Catherine's expression shift from irritation to reluctant interest as Michael methodically laid out the business case for transformation, the same case our father had developed, but presented in the language of corporate strategy rather than moral imperative. Companies that adapt to these changes proactively are demonstrating 23% better long-term performance than those that resist, Michael noted, highlighting a particularly compelling chart. Morgan Pharmaceuticals stands at a crossroads. We can fight these industry shifts and gradually lose market position, or we can lead the transformation and emerge stronger. Catherine leaned forward slightly. What exactly are you suggesting, Michael? A strategic realignment, he replied. One that preserves our core business strengths while positioning us advantageously for emerging opportunities. He clicked to the next slide, which outlined a corporate structure remarkably similar to what our father had created through the Helen Morgan Foundation. This is your support for Ellie's takeover? Catherine asked incredulously. This has nothing to do with taking sides, Michael countered calmly. I'm presenting the optimal business strategy based on market realities. The fact that it aligns with the foundation structure Dad created simply demonstrates that he saw these same trends and responded accordingly. It was masterfully done. Where I had led with moral imperative and our father's wishes, Michael had approached from pure business logic, speaking Catherine's language while arriving at the same conclusion. The litigation path carries significant risks, Michael continued, displaying a new slide showing potential impacts on stock price, regulatory relationships, and public perception. A protracted family dispute becomes public immediately. Shareholders lose confidence. Competitors capitalize on our internal division. The attorneys shifted uncomfortably as the executives in the room studied these projections with growing concern. Alternatively, Michael said, revealing his final slide, we have an opportunity for controlled transformation under family leadership. The slide detailed the compromise proposal he had shown me at the cabin, now developed into a comprehensive transition plan. Catherine would remain CEO with expanded authority over core operations. Michael would lead the new social impact division, bridging traditional business and humanitarian initiatives. The foundation would hold controlling interests but work through rather than against the existing leadership structure. This approach, Michael concluded, honors Dad's vision while building on rather than dismantling the company Catherine and I have helped build. It positions Morgan Pharmaceuticals as an industry leader in the emerging integrated business model while preserving family control and legacy. As he returned to his seat beside me, the room hummed with murmured conversations. The executors were clearly intrigued, the board members calculating implications, the lawyers reassessing their strategy. Catherine alone remained stone-faced, her eyes fixed on the proposal still displayed on the screen. "You developed this with her," she finally said, nodding toward me without using my name. "Behind my back? I developed it based on market analysis and business projections," Michael corrected. "The fact that it aligns with the foundation structure simply confirms that Dad's approach was sound from a business perspective, not just a humanitarian one." "And where exactly do you fit into this grand new vision?" Catherine asked me directly, her voice brittle with suspicion. "The foundation needs a director with humanitarian experience," I replied simply, "someone who understands the medical needs on the ground in underserved markets. That's my area of expertise, just as corporate management is yours." "How convenient," she observed coldly. "Dad cuts you back into the family business after you abandoned it for a decade." I felt the old defensive responses rising but pushed them down. This wasn't about my choices anymore. It was about finding a path forward that served something larger than any of our individual grievances. "Catherine," I said quietly, "I never wanted to run Morgan Pharmaceuticals. I still don't. What Dad wanted is for this company to fulfill its potential to save lives while remaining successful. Your business expertise is essential to that vision, not opposed to it." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker behind her anger. Uncle Robert, sensing a potential opening, leaned toward her. "Kathy," he said, using the childhood nickname she usually forbade, "I've reviewed both Michael's proposal and the foundation documents. This could work. The company stays in family hands, your leadership role is preserved, and we avoid a public legal battle that would damage everything Howard built." "You're all against me now?" she asked. But the accusation lacked her earlier fire. "No one is against you," Michael assured her. "We're trying to find a solution that works for the family and the company, that includes you, especially you." The executive team was watching Catherine closely, gauging which way the wind was blowing. For all her preparation for battle, she suddenly seemed isolated, the certainty of her position eroding in the face of Michael's reasonable alternative. One of the attorneys whispered something in her ear. She listened, nodded curtly, then addressed the room. "We'll take a 30-minute recess to review this proposal." As people filed out for the break, I hung back, watching Catherine gather her notes with sharp, angry movements. When we were alone, I approached cautiously. "I know you think I'm trying to take something from you," I said softly. "But Catherine, I'm not. None of this was my idea, not the foundation, not the restructuring. Dad created this path because he believed it was right for the company and for the family." "Dad got sentimental in his old age," she replied dismissively, but without her usual venom. "Seeing you playing hero in war zones made him emotional." "Maybe," I acknowledged. "Or maybe he remembered why Grandpa started this company in the first place, to help people access medications they needed. The profit was a means to that end, not the end itself." Catherine stilled, her hands resting on her papers. "You think I've forgotten that? That I don't care about the patients? I think you've been focused on keeping the company successful in a challenging industry," I said carefully. "That's been your responsibility, and you've done it well. But now there's an opportunity to reconnect with that original purpose while still maintaining a strong business." She studied me for a long moment, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. "You really believe that, don't you? That we can do both?" "I do," I said simply. And so did Dad. When the meeting reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted subtly. Catherine had moved from her position at the head of the table to sit beside Michael, the two of them conferring quietly. The attorneys looked increasingly frustrated as their client appeared to be moving away from litigation. After reviewing the proposal, Catherine finally announced, "I believe there may be merit in exploring a structured transition rather than immediate legal action." The collective relief in the room was palpable. Even the board members, who had arrived prepared for battle, seemed grateful for the potential of a less disruptive path forward. "However," Catherine continued, fixing me with a pointed stare, "this would require certain guarantees regarding operational autonomy and protection of existing business lines." "Absolutely," I agreed readily. "The Foundation's mission requires a financially stable company. Your expertise in maintaining that stability is invaluable." Over the next 3 hours, what had been planned as a strategy session for legal warfare transformed into a collaborative working meeting. Michael's proposal became a living document, refined and expanded with input from executives, board members, and even the reluctant attorneys who found themselves drafting cooperation frameworks rather than litigation strategies. By late afternoon, the outlines of a new Morgan Pharmaceuticals had emerged, one that balanced profit with purpose, that leveraged Catherine's business acumen, Michael's operational expertise, and my field experience in a complementary rather than competitive structure. Uncle Robert, who had watched the transformation with quiet satisfaction, finally spoke up as the meeting was concluding. "Howard would be proud," he said simply, "not just of the outcome, but of how you three found your way to it together, despite everything." In the days and weeks that followed, our tentative accord was tested repeatedly. Catherine still had moments of resistance. Michael occasionally struggled with the practical implications of our new priorities, and I had to learn rapidly about corporate governance and pharmaceutical regulations. But slowly, something remarkable began to happen. The artificial divisions our father had inadvertently created through his conflict avoidance tactics began to heal as we worked directly with each other. Catherine's business brilliance, when directed toward our expanded mission, proved even more impressive than I had realized. Michael's talent for systems and operations found new purpose in designing efficient distribution models for underserved regions, and I found myself building bridges between the corporate world and humanitarian needs, between profit imperatives and human imperatives, between the siblings who had been strangers for too long. 6 months after that confrontational reading of the will, we gathered again in Preston and Associates' inheritance reading room, this time, not by summons, but by choice. Mr. Preston, still serving as the family's attorney, though now in collaboration with Winters and Associates, had helped us formalize the final structure that would govern Morgan Pharmaceuticals and the Helen Morgan Foundation going forward. "I believe we have all the signatures required," he said, reviewing the substantial document stack before him. "The transition is now officially complete." Catherine, who had fought the change most fiercely at the beginning, was now perhaps its most effective champion. She had discovered that her business skills, when applied to our expanded mission, opened new markets and opportunities that purely profit-driven strategies had missed. "We should do this properly," she said, reaching into her bag and producing a bottle of champagne, our father's favorite brand that had accompanied every significant family and business milestone. As we toasted to the new beginning, I found myself remembering the moment that had started this journey, Catherine's cold declaration in this very room, "You deserve nothing." In a way, she had been right. None of us deserved the Morgan legacy simply by birth. We had to earn it by understanding its true value, by contributing our unique strengths to its fulfillment, by finding our way back to the purpose that had inspired its creation. "To Dad," Michael proposed, raising his glass again, "who found a way to bring us together even when he couldn't manage it in life." "And to Mom," Catherine added softly, "whose compassion lives on in the foundation that bears her name." "To family," I completed, meeting their eyes with genuine warmth. "Not just what we inherit, but what we build together." As we left the law firm that evening, walking together into the Boston sunset, I realized that my father's second will had given us something far more valuable than money or corporate control. It had given us the chance to rediscover each other, to heal old wounds, and to transform a legacy of wealth into a legacy of purpose. "You deserve nothing," they had said. But what we'd all found was something none of us could have created alone. Redemption. Not just for a family business, but for a family itself.